So, good morning, all the nerds out there. I hope you all are doing fine. And guess what? Today, in this channel, we are going to talk about postmodernism. As you can see over your screen here, we are gonna just talk about the introduction a little bit and also talk about some important postmodernist theories, right? And as you can see, the other names that we will talk about in their respective field, right? So today it'll be just basic introduction, and if you want to do quiz based on that, you can always go to our app, which is Nerd School. You can just search in your Play Store, you will find it, and you can do it there because it's free, especially this postmodernism introduction. So there will be like 20 or 30 free tests there that you can do based on all literary criticism, theory, and of course we have culture studies, so that you can do. But if you want full everything, like we have like 10,000 questions based on all theory, criticism, and culture, that you can subscribe. You just have to download the app and start doing your tests. Right. So let's move to our important topic today, postmodernism. And here we are going to explore its theory and criticism. So first of all is the introduction here. So I'll just tell you in very short form. As you can see, all these points here, and remember the PPT will be provided there in PDF format. Of course, you can download it from the app itself. Okay, so let me tell you about the postmodernism. Imagine this. This postmodernism is like a rebellious cousin of modernism, showing up in the mid 20th century and saying like, hey, I don't buy into those old ways anymore. Actually, it is talking to modernism, who postmodernism. So I'll put it that way. So he is saying like, hey, I don't buy into those old ways anymore. Okay, so it's not a specific subject, but more like a way of thinking and talking. You know how modernism had those, impressive stories. So postmodernism is kind of opposite. Postmodernism is like, now those are too grand for me. And why I use that grand word? Because of the grand narrative. We'll talk about this later. So it also doesn't really believe in a straightforward reality. It thinks, things can be more, way more complex than they seem. So postmodernism also throws out those black and white ideas where things are either this or that. So it's more like, let's mix things up and see what happens. So it has some cool concept like hyper reality. Guess who has coined this term? Write in the chat box. I'm not gonna tell you in here. So what is this hyper reality? When things get so exaggerated, they feel unreal, right? And that's what was happening in another term is simulacrum, and which is like copies of a stuff that don't even relate to original anymore. And guess what? Some famous folks hang out with postmodernism. We have like Jake Derrida, who is known for deconstruction, and deconstruction comes in postmodernism. So Derrida, who is like all about breaking down ideas. And then we have Michel Foucault. Everyone is aware of this particular dude, and why? Because Foucault, even though he started this structuralism, ended up parting with post-structuralism. So we also have some other theorists like Jean Lyotard and Jean Baudrillard, and we have others. As you can see, we have Guy's Deleuze, Felix Guattari, Maurice Blanchard, Richard Rorty, Fredric Jameson, and Douglas Kellner. So we'll talk about this all. And so if you ever hear someone talk about postmodernism, just remember one thing. It's like the rebel of intellectual world, shaking things up and challenging those old school ways of thinking. Let's move a little bit. What are the important terms that comes in postmodernism. So first is high modernism, and this is, it's like a belief in using science and tech to make the world better. So people thought this way, especially during the Cold War in the 1950s and 60s. So remember the date also. And then we have the grand narrative that we were about to talk, right? So here it is also called like meta narrative. And think of this like a big story that explains, everything. It's a way to make society believe in a big idea that's not fully realized yet. Then we have structuralism. This all we'll talk about in detail in our upcoming videos. So stay tuned and of course subscribe that channel as well. So anyway, structuralism. So this is about looking at the hidden structure in writing. It's like finding the building blocks of language and how authors use them to make meaning, right? Very simple word. And if you ask me to describe in one line, it's here, guys. Analyzes text, universal structures, conveys meaning. And then after that, another term comes, that is post-structuralism. And what happens there? This is a bunch of ideas that challenge structuralism. So it's like saying, hey, there's more to language and culture than just the structure. So that's what post-structuralism is. And if you just describe it in one line, it would be like critiques structuralism, explores diverse theoretical approaches. Then we have another word, that is deconstruction. And imagine looking really closely at text. You find words or ideas that sometimes don't make perfect sense, right? Or even cancel each other's out. So it's about showing that meaning isn't always clear cut or crystal clear. It might have some flaws in it, right? So in that deconstruction form, we can, construct meaning can. So that is all about this. Now we'll move to important theorists. And guess who? The first is Lyotard. And here, as you can see, that's how he looks like. And this is the especially his work, The Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge. It's very important that we always talk about Lyotard. Okay, so he was really into the ideas of guy named Nietzsche. So he was kind of influenced by Nietzsche, and who had some big thoughts about life, right? So now one of the interesting things Lyotard did was use a word you might have heard, right? And that's what our topic for today's discussion is, postmodernism. So he first used it in a book he wrote called The Postmodern Condition, a Report on Knowledge, 1979. So in this book, what happens, Lyotard talked about how people use language. He said it's like playing different language games. Imagine you're playing a game with your friend, okay, where you have to describe something without saying its name. How are you going to do it? So that's a bit like how language works according to Lyotard. So he looked at two types of language game. One is of the expert, another is of the philosophers. So remember these two language game that he introduced in The Postmodern Condition, a Report on Knowledge, 1979. Got it? So now here's where it really gets interesting. He talked about how in the computer age, information is like messages, like messages that get sent around. He compared getting these messages to being a part of a language game. He said, this is how we turn knowledge into details, right? So what about meta-narrative? So we'll just talk about meta-narrative here a little bit. So that's a kind of fancy word for big stories that try to explain everything. Think of it like a superhero movie that ties together all the characters and events. So Lyotard didn't really buy into those big stories. He said they don't work so well because they assume there's just one big truth out there. He believed that truth is more about the time and place you are in rather than one big truth that fits everywhere. Right? So, if we sum it up, Lyotard, so it was like Lyotard was all about not believing in these big stories and thinking that truth depends on when and where you are. It's like knowing that there's no one size fits all the answer and that things are more complicated than they seem. Right? So that was all about Lyotard. And here's the postmodern condition, a report on knowledge. You can see here, this is Richard Rorty and his work, Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature. So in this book, Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, which is all about thinking deeply about big question. And he's saying that some philosopher, nowadays are trying to copy the way scientists work, which is not quite right. He's also saying that there is this old way of looking at things in philosophy, where people believed that we can understand the world by making pictures or ideas in our mind that match reality. Rorty doesn't agree with this. He's like, nah, let's not worry about trying to perfectly match up our ideas with reality. So he's also talking about how we think we are separate from what we observe or know. And that nature just kind of sits here and there doing its thing. Rorty is shaking things up here, saying that maybe we are more connected to what we observe and nature isn't as passive as we thought. So if you ask me to describe it in a nutshell, so it will be like Rorty's book is all about how philosophy shouldn't copy science and how our old ways of thinking might not be as true as we thought. He's asking us to think in a new way. So these are all postmodernist theories, right? Okay, now we'll just move to the our most important person that of course you get at least one question from specifically from this, and that is easy, right? It's the term simulacra and simulation. So these two terms they usually ask, and with that there is one important term comes, that is hyper reality. They are in exam you're quite facing these kind of questions about who coined the term like hyper reality and who wrote that simulacra and simulation. So these words and this term you should remember. So anyway, so this thinker, our Jean Baudrillard, was talked about some interesting ideas in his book, and that book is called Simulacra and Simulation. He came up with a concept related to reality. Basically, he said that nowadays our idea of reality is messed up because of all the signs and symbols we see everywhere, especially through things like electronic media and digital stuff. He talked about how these signs can replace the real thing and create something he called a hyper-real. It's like reality isn't what it used to be. So in simpler words, he's saying that our perception of reality has changed because of all the signs and symbols we are surrounded by. Very simple. Okay, now let's move to the Fredric Jameson's and his work Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, 1991. So, Fredric Jameson and his ideas on postmodernism, he was one of the first people to really dig deep into what postmodernism is all about. Now, he didn't just see it as some random thing, he looked at it as a whole historical period, like a specific time in history. But it's not just about history, it's also about intellectual trend and social phenomena. So remember these terms when Fredric Jameson work is mentioned anywhere, like postmodernism or the cultural logic of late capitalism. Remember these terms: historical period, intellectual trend, and the social phenomena. So Jameson wasn't just keeping all this wisdom to himself. He actually gave a series of talks of at the Whitney Museum. Remember that? Sharing his thoughts with everyone. So these talks later turned into big book called Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, which was published in 1991. So basically, he was trying to help us understand how postmodernism fits into our world and culture and how it connects with the way our society works. Right. Now we have the last person here, Douglas Kellner's analysis of the journey, which is written by Douglas Kellner. It's all about something called postmodernism, which is a way of thinking about stuff. Now, Kellner talks about this idea that old ways of thinking, what he calls assumption and procedure of modern theory, should be tossed out of the window. Instead, he wants to focus on looking at things in our everyday lives and giving them a good thing. He's really into using real life examples to understand this theory better. Like he checks out how it applies to stuff happening around us. And get this, Kellner thinks that science and technology studies are super important to understand this theory fully. And he's like, hey, this theory isn't complete without thinking about how science and tech play into it. So, in a nutshell, Kellner's journal is all about looking at things in a new way and using real life stuff to understand it better. And he's all about including science and tech in the mix to get the whole picture. So that is postmodernism, guys. And let's conclude this lecture. So in our conclusion part, we'll go once again, one more time. So to sum it all up, we have taken a wild ride through some pretty mind-bending concepts and ideas, from the rebellious spirit of postmodernism to the intricacies of philosophers like Lyotard, Rorty, Baudrillard, Jameson, and we have explored a world there. Traditional boundaries are questioned and new ways of thinking emerge, and that is postmodernism, right? And postmodernism, that cool rebellious cousin that we talked in the beginning, right? Cousin of modernism, challenges the old norms and embraces complexity. And it's all about mixing things up and rejecting simple black and white answer. We met some influential thinker along the way like Derrida, Foucault, Lyotard, and Baudrillard, and who dance with the ideas like hyperreality, language games, and the changing nature of reality itself. Right. And in Richard Rorty's, right, we talked about world like philosophy takes a different turn. He tells us not to copy science but to find our unique path of thinking. He challenges the traditional view that our ideas should perfectly match reality, suggesting that the connection between what we know and what's out there might be more intricate than we thought. And then we also talked about Jean Baudrillard, simulacra, and simulation, right? So, as we dive into the world like Lyotard, Jameson, Douglas Kellner, we have seen how their insight have woven understanding, you know, of postmodernism, and from analyzing language games and hyperreality, examining how postmodernism fit into a culture and how science and technology play a part in its clear that their ideas have enriched our intellectual landscape. Our next lecture, we'll start talking about big thinkers like Michel Foucault, Roland Barthes, Derrida, and the others. And remember this, every day we have to finish this criticism and literary theory in this month itself, which usually in exam comes around 30 questions, guys, and that is a lot. And if you attend all these 30 lectures, and also if you attend all these mock tests and the rapid fire and the tests that we made, will definitely help you, because it has a lot of things and all based on whatever they have asked in the past and what they are going to ask, of course, in upcoming exam. So there is a like vast collection of these things, and if you have time, and what I would suggest, if you do 5 tests a day in this, especially these units that we have, starting with culture studies, and then we have literary criticism, then theory, all these 3 units will give you 30 marks, and you should do 5 tests every day, and definitely you're gonna nail this 3 unit, and the questions are really good. You will love it. So guys, that was all about this postmodernism, and tomorrow we're gonna talk about maybe formalism, or we'll just move a little bit behind, and we talk about subaltern studies or post-colonialism theory. So all the tests are already there. Remember to subscribe the channel, and also if you can enroll into the course, you will get everything. All the introductory courses also there. Like right now we are till now we have just finished Shakespeare, and we are going to start his contemporaries and Jacobean. So everything is out there, guys, and you should enroll it, because we don't make lectures like ours, right? Very small lectures, 10 minutes maximum, and in that 10 minutes you will learn lots of things. And of course, if you follow with all these tests, definitely you're gonna crack this exam with ease. So guys, that's all. Goodbye, and have a good day. Remember, learn like a nerd, right? Bye bye, have a good day.